You've signed everything over, so technically we don't owe you anything anymore, my daughter said coldly over the phone. I hung up and smiled, opening my safe to look at the real property deeds safely tucked away. My children had just fallen for the most elaborate trap I'd ever set, thinking they'd conned a helpless old woman. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Have you experienced something like this? Please let me know in the comments. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 63 years old from Chicago, and this is the story of how I taught my greedy children the most expensive lesson of their lives after they tried to steal my fortune and abandon me. For 40 years, I built my life brick by brick. After my husband Richard died unexpectedly when our children were still young, I took over our struggling real estate business and transformed it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I worked 80-hour weeks, missed school plays and soccer games, all to ensure my 3 children, David, Emily, and Michael, would never want for anything. And they didn't. Private schools, Ivy League colleges, down payments for their first homes, expensive weddings. While other single mothers struggled to put food on the table, I built an empire worth over $2.3 million, comprising our family home in Lincoln Park, a lake house in Michigan, several investment properties, and a healthy stock portfolio. "Mom, you work too hard," Emily would say, touching my shoulder as I reviewed contracts late into the night. "You need to think about retiring soon." I'd smile and pat her hand. "Soon, sweetheart? I just want to make sure you're all set for life." That was my mantra, setting them up for life. David had followed me into real estate, but struggled to match my success. Emily had married well, but spent more than she earned as an interior designer. Michael, the youngest at 32, still hadn't found his calling and moved between creative ventures that never quite materialized into careers. As my 63rd birthday approached, I began feeling the weight of my years. The 5 a.m. starts were harder, the constant pressure more exhausting. The doctor warned about my blood pressure, suggesting I slow down. That's when my children began their campaign. Emily nodded enthusiastically. "We've been talking about it, actually. You should transfer the business and properties to us now, while you're still," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "able to see us enjoy them." "Tax purposes," Michael added quickly. "You'd avoid the estate taxes if you gifted everything now." I looked at my 3 children, all dressed in clothes I'd paid for, eating in my dining room, drinking my wine. Their concerned expressions didn't quite reach their eyes. "I don't know," I said slowly. "It's a big decision. We'd take care of everything," David assured me. "You wouldn't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, business headaches, nothing." It sounded reasonable on the surface. I was tired. The business was demanding. The properties required constant attention. And they were my children, the 3 people I loved most in the world. The 3 people I'd sacrificed everything for. But something in their eagerness gave me pause. Something in the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "Let me think about it," I said finally. They tried to hide their disappointment, but I saw it. And that's when I knew. The next morning, I called my old friend Judith, who had been my attorney since Richard died. We met for coffee at a small cafe downtown, away from my usual haunts where I might run into my children or their friends. "They want you to sign everything over?" Judith repeated, her eyebrows raised. "Everything? The house? The business? All of it?" I nodded, stirring my cappuccino absently. "For tax purposes, they say." Judith snorted. "That's partially true, but there are other ways to handle estate planning without leaving yourself vulnerable." She leaned forward. "Margaret, I've seen this before. Once you sign those assets over, you have no legal control anymore. If something goes wrong—" "They're my children," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Yes, and I'm sure they love you. But money changes people, Margaret. Power changes them. I've seen families torn apart by less." I thought about the subtle changes I'd noticed over the past few years. How my children had begun asking more questions about my finances. How David had suggested I make him a signatory on my accounts, in case of emergency. How Emily had asked to see my will. How Michael had begun bringing up his business ideas more frequently, always ending with how much startup capital he needed. "What would you suggest?" I asked Judith. She considered for a moment. "If you're serious about transferring assets, we could set up a trust. You would retain control during your lifetime, but the assets would transfer smoothly after your death. And if I wanted to, test them, I asked, a plan already forming in my mind. Judith's eyes narrowed. What kind of test? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. What if I let them think they've gotten what they want? What if I signed documents that appeared to transfer everything, but legally were meaningless? Judith looked shocked. Margaret, that's deceptive? Yes, but so is pressuring your mother to sign over her life's work before she's ready. They won't, I said, a new determination filling me. They'll be too busy dividing the spoils. Judith sighed. I can't recommend this course of action professionally. That afternoon, I called another attorney, someone not connected to my family or business, and set a plan in motion that would either restore my faith in my children or reveal their true characters once and for all. The transfer took place on a sunny Saturday afternoon in my home. I'd invited my children, their spouses, and my 5 grandchildren for what I called a family business meeting. My new attorney, Thomas Green, was present with an impressive stack of official-looking documents. Before we begin, I said, standing at the head of my dining table, I want you all to know that this decision comes from love. I've worked hard all my life to provide for this family, and now it's time for me to step back and let you take the reins. The smiles that spread across my children's faces should have warmed my heart. Instead, they sent a chill down my spine. There was relief there, yes, but also triumph, as if they'd won something, rather than being entrusted with something precious. Thomas began explaining the documents: transfer of property deeds, business assets, investment accounts. The stack of papers was intimidating, and I noticed none of my children actually read what they were witnessing. They were too excited, already mentally spending their inheritance. What they didn't know was that these documents were elaborate fakes. They looked authentic, contained all the right legal terminology, and even had official-looking seals, but they were legally meaningless. The real documents, the ones that actually protected my assets, were already filed and secured. My home, business, and investments were now in an irrevocable trust, with me as the primary beneficiary during my lifetime. My children would inherit eventually, but only under strict conditions that Thomas and I had carefully crafted. Congratulations, Thomas said when the last fake document was signed. The transfer is complete. David popped open a bottle of champagne he'd brought for the occasion. To Mom, he toasted, for her incredible generosity and trust in us. To Mom, Emily and Michael echoed, clinking their glasses. I smiled and raised my own glass. To family, I said simply. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my study, wondering if I'd gone too far. Was I being paranoid? Would my children prove me wrong and continue to include me in their lives, care for me as they'd promised? I desperately hoped so. But I built my business on preparing for worst-case scenarios while hoping for the best. This was no different. It didn't take long for the truth to reveal itself. The first week after the transfer, everything seemed normal. My children called regularly. Emily invited me for lunch. Michael stopped by to help with a leaking faucet. David asked for my advice on a property he was considering for his portfolio. But by the second week, things began to change. The calls became less frequent. Emily canceled our lunch plans at the last minute. Michael was suddenly too busy to help around the house. By the third week, the transformation was complete. When I called David about joining them for Sunday dinner, a family tradition for decades, he sounded uncomfortable. Actually, Mom, we're keeping it small this week. Just immediate family. I'm not immediate family? I asked, stunned. You know what I mean. Just me, Sarah. And the kids. Emily and Michael have their own plans too. That was the first direct blow. More followed quickly. Emily called to say she'd borrowed some antique furniture from my lake house for a client's staging. When I objected, reminding her the furniture had sentimental value, her tone turned cold. Mom, technically that's our lake house now. The furniture too. We can do what we want with it. Michael was even more direct. He stopped by unexpectedly, one afternoon, not to visit, but to inform me he needed $50,000 for a new business venture. I'll pay you back, he said, though we both knew he wouldn't. Michael, I don't have that kind of cash on hand anymore. Remember? I signed everything over to you three. His expression hardened. So get it from your retirement account. That's what it's for, right? When I refused, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard a framed family photo fell from the wall and shattered. The final straw came exactly 1 month after the fake transfer. I received a formal letter from a property management company, informing me that the new owners of my home, David, Emily, and Michael Wilson, had decided to sell the property, and I would need to vacate within 60 days. I called Emily immediately, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke?" I demanded when she answered. "Mom, we discussed this," she said, her voice artificially patient. "The house is too big for just you. It makes financial sense to sell it now while the market is strong. Where am I supposed to go?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "We found a nice senior apartment complex," she said, as if she were doing me a favor. "It's small, but it has everything you need, and it's affordable on your Social Security." "You promised you'd take care of me," I whispered. There was a pause before Emily responded, her voice suddenly cold and businesslike. "You've signed everything over, so technically we don't owe you anything anymore." I hung up without another word, my heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. Then I walked to my home office, opened my safe, and pulled out the real property deeds and trust documents, all still legally in my name. My children had just revealed exactly who they were, and now it was time for them to learn exactly who I was. The next morning, I called Judith and Thomas to my home for an emergency meeting. I showed them the eviction notice and recounted my conversations with my children. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," Judith said, shaking her head sadly. "What do you want to do?" Thomas asked. "We can move forward with revealing the truth immediately, or we can wait and gather more evidence of their intentions." I considered the options. "Let's wait a little longer. I want to see how far they'll go." "That's risky," Judith warned. "They think they own your home. They could try to force you out." "Let them try," I said, a steely resolve replacing my earlier heartbreak. "I want there to be no question about their intentions when this all comes to light." Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. Every call, every text, every conversation. I recorded Emily telling me I should be grateful they'd found me any place to live. I saved the voicemail from Michael saying I was being dramatic about losing my home. I kept David's email outlining how they planned to split the proceeds from selling my properties. Meanwhile, I asked Thomas to prepare for what would come next. Legal documents were filed quietly. Security measures were put in place. A detailed timeline of my children's actions was created. And then, exactly 6 weeks after the fake transfer, they made their boldest move yet. "What's going on?" I demanded, setting down my shopping bags. "You're planning renovations? I still live here?" Michael shrugged. "Not for much longer. Did you get the updated notice? You need to be out in 2 weeks now, not 60 days. We have buyers who want to close quickly." "2 weeks?" I repeated, genuinely shocked by their audacity. "That's impossible. Where would I go on such short notice?" "We've told you, Mom," David said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "The senior apartments. They have an opening next month. You can stay with one of us for the gap." "In the guest room," Michael added quickly. "Temporarily." I looked at my sons, these strangers wearing my children's faces, and made my decision. The test was over. They had failed spectacularly. "I need to get something from my office," I said calmly. "Then we'll discuss this further." I walked to my home office, closed the door, and called Thomas. "It's time," I said simply. 3 days later, I invited my children to a family meeting at my home. I told them I'd accepted the situation and wanted to discuss the logistics of my move. They arrived looking relieved, David with a folder of apartment brochures, Emily with a notepad full of helpful suggestions for downsizing, Michael barely hiding his impatience to get the conversation over with. What they didn't expect was to find Thomas and Judith waiting in my living room, along with a court reporter quietly taking notes in the corner. "What's this?" David asked, immediately suspicious. "Why are your lawyers here?" "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the sofa. "There's been a misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up." They exchanged glances but complied, perching uncomfortably on the edge of my Italian leather couch, the same couch they'd already promised to Emily's client. "6 weeks ago," I began, "you thought I signed over my entire estate to you. My home, my business, my investments, everything I spent 40 years building." "We know, Mom," Emily said slowly, as if I were confused. "We were there. And since then you have systematically pushed me out of your lives. You've canceled plans, ignored my calls, and are now trying to sell my home out from under me. You've made it abundantly clear that once you got what you wanted from me, I became disposable." "That's not fair," Michael protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mom, whatever you think has happened," David started, but I cut him off. I don't think. I know. And now, I need you to know something. I nodded to Thomas, who handed each of my children a thick legal document. The transfer you witnessed 6 weeks ago was fake. Every document was meaningless. The notary was an actress. None of it was legally binding. The shock on their faces would have been comical, under different circumstances. That's not possible, Emily whispered, flipping frantically through the papers. Thomas had given her. We saw you saw. You saw what you wanted to see, I said. You were so eager to get your hands on my money that you didn't bother to read what you were witnessing. You didn't verify the notary's credentials. You didn't question why it was all happening so quickly. This is insane, David said, his voice rising. You can't just pretend those documents weren't real. And after? Michael asked, his mercenary mind already calculating. After depends entirely on you, I said quietly. The trust includes specific conditions for inheritance. What conditions? Emily demanded. I stood up, suddenly tired of all of it. You should read the documents carefully. But in short, your inheritance is now tied to your behavior. Evidence of elder abuse, abandonment, or exploitation will result in immediate disinheritance. The trust includes funds for legal monitoring to ensure compliance. You're blackmailing us, David said incredulously. No, I corrected him. I'm protecting myself from the people who should have protected me. There's a difference. This won't hold up in court, Emily threatened, always the first to go on the offensive. Judith spoke up for the first time. Actually, it will. The trust is ironclad, and we have extensive documentation of your actions since the fake transfer, all of which demonstrate clear intent to abandon and exploit your mother once you believed she was vulnerable. So what now? Michael asked, his voice small for the first time. You're cutting us off completely? That depends on you, I said. The original inheritance plan remains intact if you demonstrate genuine care and respect, not because you're trying to get money, but because I'm your mother and you love me. Then the entire estate goes to charity upon my death, and you get nothing. You set us up, Emily said eventually. You tricked us. Yes, I admitted. I gave you a test, and you failed spectacularly. The question is, what will you do now that you know the truth? David stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Emily called me manipulative and cruel. Michael just sat there, shell-shocked, until Emily dragged him away. For 2 weeks, none of them contacted me. I continued my life as before, running my business, maintaining my properties, having lunch with friends who actually cared about me. But there was a hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I'd confirmed my worst fears about my children, but the victory felt pyrrhic. Judith called regularly to check on me. They'll come around, she assured me. Once the shock wears off, maybe, I said, unconvinced. But will it be because they've changed, or because they still want the money? The first to break the silence was, surprisingly, Michael. He showed up at my office unannounced, looking uncomfortable and slightly disheveled. Can we talk? He asked, hovering in the doorway. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat, then immediately stood again, too agitated to stay still. What we did was wrong, he blurted out. I knew it was wrong even while we were doing it, but I went along with it anyway. David and Emily were so convinced it was the right move, and I always follow their lead. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really sorry. His apology seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. What exactly are you sorry for, Michael? I studied him carefully. Michael had always been the follower among my children, easily influenced by his more dominant siblings. Perhaps that was still the case, but the regret in his eyes seemed real. I appreciate your apology, I said carefully. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. I know, he nodded quickly. I know that. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did wrong, and I want to make it right, if I can. It was a start. Emily came next, a week later. Her approach was more calculated. She brought my granddaughter Sophie, knowing I couldn't have a serious confrontation with a 4-year-old present. But after Sophie was distracted with toys in the next room, Emily surprised me. I was horrible, she said plainly. What I said to you on the phone that day, about not owing you anything, it keeps me up at night. I don't know who that person was, but I don't like her very much. Neither did I said honestly. She winced. I deserve that. We talked for over an hour. Unlike Michael's emotional apology, Emily's was more analytical. She had examined her behavior, recognized its ugliness, and wanted to understand why she'd acted that way. It was like once I thought the money was mine, this switch flipped, she admitted. Suddenly everything was about what I could get, what I could do. You weren't a person anymore, just an obstacle. That's what money does sometimes, I said. It reveals character rather than building it. I want to be better than that, she said. And I believed her. David was the last holdout. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Michael and Emily had begun the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, calling regularly, stopping by without agenda, including me in family events again. But David remained distant, angry. He's too proud, Emily explained during a lunch visit. He was the ringleader in all this, and he can't face the fact that he messed up so badly. His choice, I said, though it hurt more than I let on. David had always been my firstborn, the one who followed me into business, the one I'd mentored most closely. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. David stood on my porch, soaking wet, no umbrella, looking absolutely miserable. You were right, he said, as soon as I opened the door. About everything. I was selfish and greedy and ungrateful, and I convinced Emily and Michael to be the same way. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that you were right. I let him in, gave him a towel and made coffee while he collected himself. I thought I was entitled to your money, he continued once he was settled at my kitchen table. I thought because you'd always taken care of us, always given us everything, that it was somehow owed to me. It wasn't until I saw those fake documents and realized we'd get nothing that I understood what I'd become. And what was that? I asked. A thief, he said simply. I was trying to steal from my own mother and justify it as estate planning. It was the most honest thing David had said to me in years. A year has passed since that elaborate deception revealed my children's true characters and gave them the opportunity to change them. Change has come slowly, unevenly, but it has come. Michael found a job he actually enjoys, working for a nonprofit that builds affordable housing. Emily scaled back her design business to spend more time with her children, and with me, David struggled the longest with his pride, but eventually found his way back to the values I thought I'd instilled in him. We still have family Sunday dinners, but now they take place at my house, not theirs. They no longer discuss my estate or ask about financial matters. Instead, we talk about their lives, their children, books we've read, trips we're planning. I still run my business, though I've scaled back my hours. I've brought David in as a junior partner, not a gift, but a proper business arrangement with contracts and performance expectations. He's rising to the challenge admirably. Last week, I celebrated my 64th birthday. My children organized a small party at my home. No grand speeches about my retirement, no hints about transfer of assets, just family enjoying each other's company. As I blew out the candles on my cake, Emily asked what I'd wished for. Nothing, I said truthfully. I already have everything I need. And for the first time in a long time, that wasn't a lie. The lesson my children learned was expensive. It nearly cost them their entire inheritance. But the lesson I learned was invaluable. True family isn't about what you can get from each other, but what you can give. Not money or property, but love, respect, and dignity. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to realize who they've become and the chance to become someone better. As for me, I'm looking forward to many more years running my business, enjoying my grandchildren, and teaching my adult children what it truly means to be rich.